Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. First of all, many thanks to organizers to invite me for such a forum, because openly I would like once more have this strong positive feeling like I have had it 25 years ago at home. And it was something marvelous. So repetition, I fully agree with my friend, former Prime Minister of Denmark, of the positive experience. Is helpful, but not to repeat the mistakes and terrible things. I have just returned from Ukraine, and openly I am very influenced what has happened in the country of my friends, our neighbor country, because there is a war. And I remember the crying of women, the crying of men, who were looking on us and asked, please stop the war. And I started to think what we can do. Maybe we can do more than we are doing today. We can put together our voices against the tensions, the conflicts, and the wars in the Europe. When the EU has received the Nobel Prize, there was strong criticism. For what during the crisis? Many arguments against, but also 3 arguments for this prize. The first was trying to keep the peace. The second, to promote democracy and freedom. And the third, to guarantee human dignity. And these are our duties not only at home, but also in the countries fighting these days for their human dignity, peace, and democracy. I was thinking where we are after 25 years, what we have done and what is still open as a challenge, as a task. You know, as I am also a professor of statistics, I will start with few figures, only few, I promise. 7 billion people in the world, 7 billion different life stories. 700 million in Europe, 1/10. 500 million in European Union, 330 million in Eurozone. The same amount as United States of America. This amount is producing 19% of overall world GDP. But we have also produced 2 world wars. We are still producing conflicts and tensions at our continent. That's why I think we can say that the European Union is still a divided unit because of social and cultural environment, because of differences of the democratic institutions and their performance, because of rule of law, because of the level of corruption. That's why the division inside Europe is not according to common value systems, but according to the differences and interactions in between environments and concrete institutions. We can find 3 main axes in the Europe. Social and economic environment, it's clear division in between north and south part of the Europe. Very clear. The differences in political and civic environment is the difference in between east and west. And third axis, according to the role of the state. Strong or not so strong state with the competencies, in other words, with big and small governments. So we have different, we can say, clusters of countries in Europe looking on the fingers what's going on in another country. And when there is a problem, there is once more the question of the kind of solidarity and cooperation inside Europe. I think we can mention four specific features of Europe as a whole. Very briefly, they are very well known, so-called Eurosclerosis. It has nothing together with memory, it's economic category, you know it. Eurohysteresis, Eurodiversity, and different Euro history. All these 5 features are the background for decision-making process on the EU level, as we have to find agreement based on these very specific features we have, and they are, I think, not changeable. That's why maybe at present there are such voices that, come on, there is something wrong with the principles of democracy. You have problems, you have very high level of unemployment. Classical economic law that economic growth meant lower unemployment doesn't work in Europe. It's this feature of Europe I have mentioned already. So there are voices very well known from Hermet, from Crouch, from Keane about winter of democracy, post-democracy, death of democracy, or critical citizen, not dissatisfied citizens, new conflict in between the power and the citizens, and question, sometimes answers, that it's the deep crisis of content and basis of liberal democracy. Friends, I think this is very dangerous because it's the first step for returning of any kind of authoritarian regimes or more totalitarian regimes. Mr. Prime Minister has mentioned the risks of Eurosceptical voices, extremists, nationalists, etc. Such interpretation is leading to this kind of movements inside Europe. We have created strong expectations in the year 1989. After the 40, 50 years of totalitarian regimes in some countries, after 2 totalitarian regimes, fascism and communism, Slovakia is an example of this kind of combination of 2 strong totalitarian regimes. First time after the 1 century, people had a chance to create their own expectations. And really, they were very, very high. Democratic deficit is something what we can define as a gap in between these expectations and real measurement of real situation in the countries and societies. And we can really conclude that this democratic deficit is much higher in the post-communist countries in comparison with all the democratic countries. I have in my mind the way to the freedom. Always, this way from non-freedom to freedom is interconnected with different phenomena. First step is huge euphoria, huge expectations. Then very quickly is the first valuation and questions. Oh, come on, it's very complicated. It was maybe better to live under the totalitarian regime but have security and basic covered basic needs. Maybe we have to return back. Then is the phase to define new rules of behavior, new constitution, new legal system. And once more, who has the truth? Why there is a majority right? Why my truth is not the truth of all the citizens around me? And once more, this nostalgia to the regime when there was not such a pressure to think about the things, to negotiate, to formulate new rules of game. When I had a look on the trends in such attitudes and valuation of citizens 50 years ago, such measurements we have had on the table, then I can conclude that for all democracies, there is no any signal of so-called death of democracy or something like this. Only what is visible is fluctuating support of democratic regime, sure interconnected with the effects of crisis. But it's normal. It's normal. In these countries is really deep-rooted feelings of national pride and national identity. Today, we have chance to meet each other and accept the name, which are for some of us very complicated. The second question usually is, from where are you? And we Europeans had answered, from Slovakia, from France, from Italy, from different countries. I didn't hear the answer, I'm from Europe. European identity is something what we still have had no in our minds. More, as I will show immediately, in former post-communist countries, national identity is still very weak. That's why we have problem with supranational identity. So there is no dissatisfied Democrats, but as I have mentioned, only fluctuating support and liberal democracy is doing quite well. Another situation is in post-communist states. There are really larger disparities between expectation and perceived performance in the country. These societies are less familiar with democracy. If in all the democracies there are values of informative societies of self-expression, in this part of the Europe is more oriented to traditional security values. We didn't do the step to so-called Toll-Flair third way, not at all. Economic development and subjective sense of well-being proved equally important for satisfaction or dissatisfaction of citizens. So that's why the valuation of democracy is based and measured through own standard of living, security system in the country, and own happiness. Knowledge about democracy is lower, much lower in these countries, and it's true that more you know, more you behave like a Democrat. And last but not least, the trust towards news, the role of media. There is law, sociological law. The more you have information for news, objective news, more you are satisfied with democratic features in your country. In our countries, the role is played by tabloids. News are somewhere in the corner, and if it's very for discussion, if the news are really the news and not more tabloids information than the news. Therefore, knowledge is strengthened or weakened at the micro level with greater or smaller education and access to the news media. That's truth. And we have heritage on our back, and very strong heritage. Briefly, victimization. Somebody is always guilty. If not Moscow, Big Brother, then Brussels. If not Jewish nation, then Roma. But always is somebody another guilty for the situation. Conspiracy theory, everywhere, to everything. Look what's in so-called news media in this part of Europe concerning 25th anniversary of revolution or change, as you wish. It was the play game of state secret police. It was the play of United States of America. Huge amount of conspiracy theories on the internet interpreted as a facts. Xenophobia, very well known. Learned helplessness. Yes, or if you wish, in other words, state paternalism. We were educated in the society where the state was social father. It means pater. And this role is still in the mind and in the heads of citizens. Something have happened, state will help me. If not, state is responsible that I cannot fulfill my happiness and my expectations. We still have in our social structure 5 main groups. Former privileged supporters of regime. And what is maybe the bad news, that many of them are privileged also at present a new regime. This is understanding as total non-justice in our countries. There were science supporters, if you wish, pragmatic citizens who try to survive under the conditions of any kind of regimes. Doesn't matter, I will find my private sphere, my private life, and I will survive. No one totalitarian regime can be reproduced without support of citizens. It's impossible. Also, to be silent is support of reproduction of regime. Then the group which lived in so-called double morality. One morality for public sphere, official ideology, another morality at home, private morality. Therefore, such phenomena like corruption was normal. Was normal. Okay, without networking and corruption, it was impossible to survive, so corruption was identified as a normal part of everyday life. To be a liar, because if I thought something totally different, but because of ideology, at the school and official institutions, I had no problem to repeat, or with problems, but I repeated it. Interpretations which were very far from reality, then it was normal to live in this relativism of moral values. Aggressive apathy. Angry people, totally dissatisfied, but only angry at private sphere. Never trying to express their position on public. And open critics, so-called dissidents, who really openly criticized the regime. In some countries, there were very strong, like Solidarność in Poland, or a very strong movement in Czech Republic, but much weaker, for example, in Slovakia because of tacit agreement with the power. Mr. Galbraith mentioned that the change in 1981 in Europe was one of the most positive events in modern history. But we still, friends, really cannot say that the majority has enthusiastically embraced the new way of life which was formed under the influence of complicated social and economic transformation. So there are several tendencies, and there are tendencies toward authoritarianism and undermining of democratic institutions. There are problems, really, with consolidation of democracy and establishment of democratic institutions. There is still people's insistence on the strong role of the state. Paradoxically, they want stronger and stronger support from the state, deeper crises, deeper and wider asking for the support from the state. There is very critical reaction to social inequalities, which significantly grew under the new economic conditions and recent crises. People are dissatisfied with the level of corruption, weak rule of law, weak transparency, non-justice, and as Timothy Garton Ash called it, nomenclatura democracy, as Iveta Radicová called it, oligarchia democracy. Really prevailing is weak confidence towards governmental and democratic institutions and doubts on legitimacy of EU decision-making process. I would like to conclude with positive message. And there is positive message. We did it. Moses needed 40 years. We have the journey of 25 years. And we are the part of the most developed countries of the world. Yes, we have problems, but citizens have a chance to solve them if they are not silent. There are protests all around the world because they have a chance to give a feedback to old kinds of governing and governance. I have started with my fresh experience from Ukraine. Ukraine is a totally different country like they were 25 years ago. After the Maidan, there is strong control and strong impact of citizenship. The orientation of the country is totally different like it was several months ago. And the citizens understand how they can use their power. And I think this is about the freedom, because freedom is of understanding of the power of citizenship. Thank you very much for your attention.